Folk, as Roy likes to say. This has been an absolutely superb month. It's almost over. I want to welcome everyone who's joining me. Uh, been enjoying Isla month. We started in the south with Ardbeg, did almost an entire week of Ardbeg whiskeys, some both quarter range as well as some unique bottles that I picked up from the distillery. Then went to Lagavulin, did almost a week of Lagavulin, Lafroig, Bowmore. Just was in doing Bruichladdich, did the Octomore 8.1 with Keith from Malted Man Cave. Did this posted this morning, the gin, the botanist from Bruichladdich. Really enjoyed that. And now we're moving on to Kilchoman. Back from 1977 to 1984, there was a TV show called Fantasy Island. And at the beginning of the show, an airplane would come into Fantasy Island, and a little Frenchman would be up in a tower. And as the plane, this water plane, was coming into the dock, the little Frenchman would say, "The plane, the plane," and then Mr. Rourke, played by Ricardo Montalban, and I can't remember Tattoo's name, the other character's name. I think first name was Harv, if I recall correctly. And of course, they would come down and there would begin a magical adventure. The island or Mr. Rourke seemed to have some sort of magical powers to make all kinds of things happen. And there's been a number of different movies, TV shows, and so forth that always portrayed as a magical place, a fantasy island that if you won the lottery, that you would go off and go to Tahiti or Hawaii or some far obscure away place where you could spend the rest of your life hanging out on a beach, getting coconuts from the trees and pineapples and just enjoying the good life and a tropical climate. That's never been, though, for me. I've never wanted to necessarily go to Hawaii or some tropical place. I've never had this sort of fantasy about going someplace like that. But when I fell in love with whiskey back in April 2016, for those who don't know, a lot of people have already heard this story. I've been into wine for 20 years. I'm a certified sommelier. I'm a French wine scholar at the Wine Scholar Guild. When I was studying for the Debusset diploma, and one of the units for the diploma was on spirits, I got introduced to the Macallan 12 and instantly fell in love with whiskey. And off I went on a whole new journey. I don't do things halfway. I don't go in just a little bit. I go both feet in, full on. Buy tons of books, buy a bunch of bottles, and start traveling. Because for me, it's always about the people, the place, if you can get there, and then learning about the production. Or you're talking about vineyards, or you're talking about stills, you're talking about grapes, or you're talking about grains. It's always been part of my joy of exploration of both wine and whiskey. So it was a fantasy, it was a dream to go to Scotland. Those of us here in the United States who love whiskey, particularly love Scotch, we want to go to Scotland. So I had a little bit of fears. I'm not a big fan of flying, going to a place unknown, a place I've never been to, driving on the other side of the road, on the other side of a car. I had went in with a little bit of fear and trepidation. And part of that trip would be going to Isla. And I went in there with just the concept of, we're going to take a ferry to an island. We're going to visit some distilleries, enjoy some whiskeys. I had no idea what would happen when I got there, that I would fall in love, that I was in this magical place. And if you haven't seen already, Roy, my guest, I did a video called The Magic of Isla, that I would just fall in love with this place. Immediately started looking around for a place to settle in, a place of, maybe I could live here, maybe I could retire. I found that Isla is my fantasy island. Not necessarily going to hang out on the beach, but it's more than just whiskeys. It's more than some nice beaches. We went to Macquarie Bay. It's more than everything else. There's something else that's intangible that I can't really define or put into a box. So this month, I wanted to do Isla month and work my way from south to north and attempt to at least a little bit sort of relive the experiences there, talk about the experiences, share the experiences there, as well as go through some whiskeys that I brought back during my trip. I want to say hello to everyone in the room real quick before I invite Roy on. I know I have a larger group in here, larger than normal, a lot of familiar faces, a lot of new people. I may miss a few. It's a challenging when you're doing live streams too. When you get past 30, 40, 50 people. Amy, how you doing? And there's some names here I'm not going to be able to pronounce. Thomas Elmer, James Hope, Hans von Arnhem, I'm probably messing this up. Mose Chun, Ebhead, James Hope, I already said that already. Hoagie Bear, Guten Tag, or Good Nobben. Let's see. Thomas Buck. I don't know if it's Juka or Yuka Moon. Multi-haggis muncher. And that was something else my guest today introduced me to, was haggis. We'll talk more about that later. Gregor Loch Ness. How you doing, sir? I'm going to try to pronounce this name. Svetsar Lazarov. Hope I didn't butcher that one. Keith Corbett. Gregory Serafin from France. Bonjour, monsieur. Mike Lassick. My French is worse than my Scottish. Service Eliphas. Mark Goines. Brandon Bullard. Scrolling. Jimmy Jazz. I like that name. Scrolling. Kilted Moose. Jason Coates. Donald Rance. David Savante or Cavante. I'm messing that up. The Whiskey Dram. Thank you much for joining. Mark Slinger. Eric Gilbert. I'm going to spend the rest of this night just going through saying hello to everybody. The Whiskey Friend. Alan, how you doing, sir? Everwind. Jesse Voisin. And if I missed anybody, My Bourbon Journey, see you next month. He'll be coming on here during Bourbon Month. And I'm going to hurry up and scroll on down. All righty. So if I missed anyone, Kenneth Kelty, if I missed anyone, please forgive me. And I'll try to interact with everybody in the chat room. If you have a question or something for either Roy or I, you don't even have to put the @ symbol anymore. You can just put, but you have to spell my name correctly. E-R-I-K, not C, W-A-I-T, and then it'll show up in orange. You can put the @ symbol to make it easier for to type it in, but it's E-R-I-K, W-I-T. If you put that in there, if you have a particular question, I'll try to address it as we go through this or a comment. Hey, Daniel Whiskey Throttle, thank you very much for tuning in, and Andy C. All righty. So, Roy, why don't you say hello to the folks?
Hello, whiskey folk. How are we all? Wonderful to see you all on a Friday night, right? Very interesting to hear you speaking there as well, Eric. I think this is the right place for me because the way you were talking about Isla and kind of going through the distilleries and things, it was in my head that what you're really doing is reliving that trip of last year. And then you said the words that actually was what you were trying to do. And I can relate to that completely. So I'm in the right place. I'm very happy to be here and relive that island that I find so magical as well. And of course, I was attracted to by whiskey. Whiskey took me there the same as it did for you. But when you go there, the island grabs you, right?
Absolutely. And one of the things is, it's interesting how our senses are tied together. You can have a particular beverage or hear a song, or even like a song will remind you of a relationship. A song will remind you of a movie when it was in the movie, or a whiskey will remind you of maybe the first time you had that with someone or in some place, and it'll tie in and bring in all these other memories. Our olfactory senses are very much good keys for memories. So not only in terms of just going over photos and video and all that, but as I've returned to some of these whiskeys, and some of these I've already opened in my videos in which I shared photography of my trip through Scotland. I've already opened these, always gone through these, but I'm returning to them as they've opened up a little bit more. But I find in going back to them on the nose, it's like a flashback. It brings back all these fantastic memories, but it also brings back a little bit of pain because I had to leave eventually. I really wanted to. I fell in love with Scotland as a whole, but with Isla in particular. So how I know you've been to Isla at least a couple of times, going over for say for the Fishil. So how many times have you been to Isla?
I've only been to the Fishil twice. The Fishil is the annual festival they have, the annual festival of whiskey and music, or malt and music. They have it at the end of May. It runs for a week at the end of May, and each distillery has an open day, and each day we all kind of go to different distilleries, whichever one's got the open day. It's a fantastic event. If you want to kind of get in deep at the distilleries, it's not really the best time to go because it's very, very crowded. But if you're interested in community and just kind of the sharing of whiskey and the celebration of it all, the Fishil's fantastic. So I've been there a couple of times for that. The first time was my 40th in 2010. But I've been fortunate to go over to Isla outside of Fishil as well. And that's kind of magical too, because there's just lots of quiet time, downtime. The distilleries are much quieter, and they're able to take a bit more care over the people that are visiting them, right? And you can get, it's a bit less rushed if you're really interested in seeing the distilleries and the people, and enjoying tours and things like that. And obviously when you arrived, Erik, it was out of Fishil. You had lots of time, right?
Yeah, I arrived in June, although it seemed like, fortunately for me, there was like this afterglow from Fishil in that some of the whiskeys that were Fishil editions were still available. And so I was able to snatch those. And the weather was unbelievable. And I was told, don't think this is what Scotland's like. I felt like I'd brought California weather with me over there. It was absolutely fantastic. In fact, not just to the west of Kilchoman is Mackay Bay, and we made a little side trip over there. And tomorrow I'll be posting a premiere Vin from No Nonsense Whiskey. We recorded last week a stream together in which we did the Kilchoman Mackay Bay. Anyway, so while there, we took a little side trip and we went over the sand dunes down onto the beach at Mackay Bay, and I picked these up. I picked up these little these seashells from Mackay Bay and brought these back. I had to bring back as much as possible, a little bit of Isla, and this one's kind of like a purple color to it. But there was hardly anybody there on the beach. The weather was absolutely fantastic, and you would have thought you were on a secluded beach, maybe somewhere along the California coast, or perhaps even.
Well, that is until you take a few steps into the absolutely freezing cold Atlantic waters, right?
Well, I didn't do that. I was wearing sneakers and shorts. I didn't take any step into the water. We were just looking at least visually, it did it. But the morning before we left, I went down to Bowmore just to walk around because we didn't tour the distillery. And there were some people there in their full clothes, not swimsuits or wetsuits, who had taken a dip in the water off the shore of Bowmore. So they were doing it. They were going into the water. But so for me, if you were to come to California and I were to show you around, maybe we were to take a train down the coast, or I'll just go up to Napa. It's everything I've already seen before, known before. It's my own backyard, really familiar with it. And while I would enjoy the scenery and enjoy the countryside, suddenly, Siri just started talking to me. I don't know why. I said scenery and it picked it up as Siri. Anyway, if I were to give you a tour of California, for me, I would enjoy it, but it's stuff I've seen before. I've seen it all and I enjoy it, and I love California. So for you, though, I was wondering for Isla, when you go over there, it's close to where you're at.
Yeah.
Does this have that same sort of magic, even though you're from there?
Yeah, I mean, I think as the crow flies, Isla is very, very close. It's, we flew there and it took minutes literally to take off from Glasgow and land in Isla. But normally we wouldn't fly. It was just because of timing. The last time that we went, normally you'd drive, and because of the shape of the west coast of Scotland, you have to kind of drive a long way to go a very short distance. So you're a couple of hours just to get to Kennaicraig for the ferry, and then you take a couple of hours ferry trip across to the island. So you've had that time of that journey to do the transition, and as you move through the landscapes, you're no further north than Glasgow. In fact, you might even be a little bit south of Glasgow. I'm not really sure, maybe similar. but you feel like you're suddenly in the rugged landscapes of the Highlands, and then you move on to the islands and you move across, you know, the water, and you arrive in Isla, and through that transition that's happened over that journey, you're in a completely different frame of mind. And it feels very, very far away. Obviously, we're still in Scotland, but it does feel like a distance. And actually, to go to Isla, it's very difficult to have a meaningful experience kind of going in and out on a day trip, right? You have to have some overnight accommodation and spend at least a couple of days there. I would suggest even more than that. Because anytime you leave, Eric, and that feeling that you experienced the last time you left is always the same. You always feel like you've not had long enough.
So I was there for 3 days. Of course, the first night you get there, because you can kind of late, you don't go to any distilleries. You start fresh the next morning, taking a long drive from Edinburgh. And then we stopped at Deanston, we went to Oban, and then we got to where we pick up the ferry, take the ferry over. And one of the interesting things is because you've been there by plane and by ferry?
Yes, both. Well, I've only traveled by plane one time, and that was last year. Before every other time has been by ferry.
So there's this sort of emotional drama internal as you're approaching, because it's not you're not on a speedboat. You're on a very and the water is like lake. It's not real rough. It's about equivalent to lakes, and you have this slow, dramatic. Because you go down south and you're coming up from, if people know what the map of Isla looks like, you come around the south and you come up to Port Ellen, and there's this slow approach, and you see the familiar white houses and then the ridge line, and it's like something out. Okay, you've seen pictures of it, you've seen videos of it, but you never ever think you're going to go there. And there's this emotional buildup. Is you go, I cannot believe we're pulling into Isla, and maybe it's just me, but the energy has already been built up to get there, and it's like, and then like you said, the time goes by so fast. You spend a couple of days in the south, then go to the north through Brookline, Kilchoman, Coila, and Bunnahabhain. Of course, Ardenhoe wasn't open yet. It goes by so fast, but it's almost like I feel like this is a place I want to grow old and be buried here. And I've traveled around a lot of different places. I've all over the United States. I've never been to France. I've never had that emotional attachment to a place that I did, and I sort of try to analyze it as the reason why, and I don't know if I can. But the weird thing is, so my family lived in the same house from 1967 to 2014. After my parents passed away, I sold the home. So all my memories of holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays, etc., growing up as kids, playing in the yard, neighborhood kids, were associated with this house. And once my parents were gone and we sold off the house, I'd never had an attachment to a place like I did like that. Wherever I would travel, wherever I lived, the internal sense of home and complete comfort was always that house. And it was almost like a major loss selling the house of those memories. And I never had an emotional attachment to it. But when I got to Isla, it was almost as if I think my mom might have moved there. Her spirit. I had this emotional attachment. This is the place. This is the place. Absolutely magical.
Yeah, I've always tried to kind of work out what that is, and I was aware of feeling a similar thing when I went there, even from the first time. And the first time I went there were 10 of us for my 40th in a minibus. And we went there for the whiskey, and it was during Facial. We were all having a big party. It was great fun. But I remember having a couple of conversations to my friends at that time, and we touched on it to say, you know what, this place is fantastic. We should come back here when it's not the festival. So it wasn't just me that felt that the island was kind of having a draw as well. And when I went back again, I felt the same thing happening. And that was the motivation for me making that Isla video that you mentioned last year, because I wanted to try and fathom, is it just people that are into whiskey that feels that? Is that what's doing it? Or is it, that the island does have a kind of an attraction, a draw to it. And almost everybody I spoke to, in fact, everybody I spoke to without exception, said that no, they absolutely love the place. And I know that you were particularly afflicted because we got to hang out for a little while after you came back. And you were sending me messages while you were there, and you were looking at real estate. You were seriously trying to fathom a way that you might be able to switch your passport in, right? So that's quite a significant draw there. But I know what you mean about the emotional thing as well. And it's almost like perhaps you've been there in a previous life or something. And we were both there in that crazy summer of last year when we had ridiculously hot weather in Scotland. You remember when you and I did the live stream from this very room, it was the hottest recorded day that Glasgow had ever seen. It was in the 30s. It was just an incredible summer last year. And Isla, for me, became almost like a Caribbean island in some views. But I don't think that that's what it is, because I've been to Isla when it's moody and when it's changeable and when it's cold and blowing in your face. I've seen all of that. And it doesn't matter. I said to somebody just recently, nobody goes to Isla for a tan, right? The weather is incidental. I think it's the actual island itself.
So I kind of wonder. It's probably there's some things you just can't dissect every ingredient of something and then collectively figure out how it all get this result. And it's sort of something I've learned in analyzing wines and whiskeys. When you're preparing for exams, you got to analyze everything so that when given something blind, you can retro engineer it and then say, this wine is, it's a 2009 Bordeaux left bank Cabernet based, new American oak. It's probably a first or second. You do that sort of an analysis so you can figure out what it is. But one of the things I've learned in whiskeys, and I've sort of, particularly in my earliest parts of studying whiskeys and getting into whiskeys, is doing the same thing, trying to understand production. What does, so there's like 10 different barley varietals that are commonly used. What does those contribute? What does the line arm do? What does the water do? What does the various timing of the cuts do? And on and on and on, and try to analyze it to death. And I came to the conclusion that you can figure out some parts of it, but then there's this intangible part that's beyond math. It's not reducible to a formula. There is a spirit to where the sum is greater than the whole of the parts. And that's kind of where the magic in whiskey is. Wine shares that, sure, but there's something I think unique to that in whiskeys. And I think there's something to that as well, that I think part of the atmosphere of Isla is the culture of the people who live there, who've built a life there, and the history and everything else that goes there, as well as the radical differences in the weather throughout the year. I mean, it's all these are individual ingredients that lead up to why the place is the way it is. But I think there's something intangible. There's just this spirit of Isla that makes Isla to what it really, really is.
And I mean, I don't even mind if it's us being overly romantic as whiskey fans, whiskey geeks, and we're just kind of, we're having this experience through whiskey. Whiskey's been the conduit for us. And we go there and then we discover a magical island beyond that, and it surprises us and it seduces us and things. I don't mind if we're looking at the island through kind of whiskey tinted spectacles, right? I think that whatever has come together, as you say, all these things that had to happen, all these forks in the road, some of them being incidental things. For 100 years, Isla was tax exempt when it came to distilling. So it's not just about the fact that it was illicit distilling that was going on in secluded bays and things. They got a break for almost a century and things that meant that Isla could kind of just really firmly establish itself as a whiskey producing island. And all these things that's happened over the course of history has meant that that's the product that we have. And it's whiskey that's taken us there. It's whiskey that's allowed us to uncover that island. And I'm sure that so many islands in the west of Scotland that I haven't visited yet are just as magical. But for us to be able to be on a magical island that happens to have 8 distilleries and soon to be 9. In fact, 9 if we include Ardnahoe. It's actually running Spirit now. And actually, Gregor is in the comments and he's asking me if there's any news of Gap Breck. Still a political situation there, Gregor, and maybe it'll happen in the future. But I think there's likely to be a Port Ellen one that will come earlier. And I'm not talking about Port Ellen itself. I'm talking about another project that's happening in Ireland outside of Gap Breck. And of course, we can look forward to Port Ellen being relaunched as well in the next couple of years, although I think that'll take longer than Diageo are currently sharing with us just now. But yeah, what we've got is an island with 2,500 people, I think, is on it. I think that's the population. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. And
we've got around 3,000.
Yeah, and we've got getting on for, we're into double figures distillery wise now. By the time we see a couple of years out, it's really quite incredible. Quite incredible. Also, Skogsmard asked a question about Bowmore earlier there. He said he found a 3/5 full bottle of Bowmore 12. However, about half the cork had broken off, fallen into the bottle and dissolved. Is it still safe to drink? Skogsmard, I wouldn't worry about it. That Bowmore's been up against oak, the inside of an oak barrel for 12 years. A little bit of cork isn't going to turn it. Just be careful that the cork didn't dissolve because the cork was infected, but you'll taste that. You'll get a really vegetal flavour from the whiskey straight away. You'll even pick it up in the nose before you taste it. But yeah, the whiskey's probably going to taste fine. If the cork pieces bother you, just put it through a sieve or a coffee filter or something. It's absolutely fine. Don't waste the whiskey if you're enjoying it. And Welsh Toro wants me to tell you and remind you that Italy and Spain and even Wales are also freaking amazing. Food's a bit better too, although he admits not Wales. People getting on planes might like the diversion, but he admits that he loves Isla too. But I think if you go to Italy and Spain, you're going there for a very specific thing. You're going there for a vacation. You're going there for downtime, beach time, cocktails in the evening, dining al fresco, all of that stuff. You go to Isla for different things, I think.
Well, the funny thing for me is, and it's just my personality. For me, a vacation, or you guys call a holiday, is not about laying around and relaxing. That's just not my personality. My vacation or holiday is all about adventure, going seeing places, meet new places. For me, the idea of laying around on a beach, drinking a Corona, under a big umbrella in the sun, is not it. I'd get bored or sitting around reading a book like that. It's not my thing. So for me, it's all about exploration and seeing something new. And for me, I'd love to go to Italy. I've been to France. I love Italian wines. I would love to go, but if I was going to Italy, I would be going there for wine. I would love to go to Piemonte. I love to go to Tuscany. I love to go to, Alto Adige, or go all the way down to, I don't know, Basilicata or something like that in the south, and explore Italy, which is funny because I've been into wine for 20 years and I fell in love with whiskey, and this was not on my agenda. This was not on my agenda. I've kind of gone off in a completely different direction, and I've got much more to explore. I'm returning in July 2019. I'll be in London for a couple of days, landing in Glasgow July 6th, Saturday, and then I'll spend a couple of weeks there. And I'm already planning 2020, my trip back to Scotland in 2020, and maybe 2020 return to Isla, perhaps another distillery, maybe Ardnahoe will be open, and then go up to Jura and so forth. But in terms of what do poets write about, or songwriters write about, a lot of some books that I have on whiskey. In fact, Andrew Jefford, his book on Isla, Peat, Smoke, and Whiskey, I think it's called. He begins every chapter with a little haiku about Isla. So I think the spirit of Isla, or the sense of this romanticism we have, it's not just us. It gets shared, and it spurs on people to write poetry or wax poetically about it.
Or take to YouTube and evangelize about it, right?
Absolutely.
And it's funny what you said there about kind of being into wine and then kind of whiskey. I mean, I always feel that it's kind of one of the things I say, and you'll relate to this as well, that you didn't discover whiskey. Whiskey found you.
Oh yeah, I was not looking for it.
That's right.
Not looking for it. My opinion of whiskey was, I approached whiskey and all other spirits like, It's like you have this mandatory class you have to take in college. You know, it's part of the basics. It's not part of your major. You know, your whatever your major is when you're in college and university, but you have to take this one class. And so, okay, I'll get through it. I want to get real good grades, so I'll study really, really hard. And I want to pass this. But once I get through this class, I'm never going to study whatever this topic is again and move on. So it really, really, really caught me off guard. I had no intention, particularly peated whiskeys. And by the way, if you want to know the trick to drinking whiskey during a live stream when you have a show, is when the other person is talking, you take a sip so that they're talking, you're enjoying the whiskey. And then when the other person's talking, then that way we can both sip whiskey while the other person's talking, and rather have dead silence, so it's both drink at the same time. But anyway, and definitely,
I've managed to get through 2 drams already. We should probably mention what we're sipping, right? Just we're both sipping different editions of the same dram right now. This has become quite an infamous bottle in my collection. Actually, this is the 4th edition Kilchoman 100% Isla at 50%. There's 2 kind of regular special releases that Kilchoman put out. One is the 100% Isla, and the other one is the Loch Gorm. And the Loch Gorm's often very delicious, sherry influence in a Loch Gorm. But this one isn't. This is 100% bourbon cask, but it's 100% Isla as well. The 4th edition for me, this was a gift to me, and I think this was a 2014 bottling, I think. And it's still got a lot of it left. And the reason is I don't particularly love this whiskey. This tastes to me very malty. And when I say malt, I get malt in a lot of whiskeys and enjoy it, but this is malty in a negative sense. So there's a lot of kind of dry malt just sits there. It's almost like you're chewing the barley, if you've ever done that when you're doing a distillery tour, right? And there's a lot of that here, but it comes with an off note, this one.
Is it sour?
It's not sour, so it's not like a... and wine, obviously, you'll be familiar with the rancio taste note, right? It's not that. It's not that kind of funk. It's not that kind of sourness. It's a wee. It's like maybe it's a bit like damp grain. It's a little bit like a hamster cage. And that's just what I get from it. But when I share this with people, even the ones that enjoy it get what I'm talking about. And that's why this has lasted a wee bit too long in my cabinet. But it put me off engaging with Kilchoman for quite a wee while. Not sipping drams, not enjoying the whiskey, but buying bottles I'm talking about. So it was quite a while before I moved back just from that.
So let me ask you a question about that one. So some of the aromas you described there, have you tried another bottle of the same release?
That's a good point. No, I haven't.
Okay, because
I don't have a memory of it.
So some of the descriptors you gave me there it's called trichloroanisole, or TCA for short, and it actually and I don't know because I'm not smelling or tasting what you're smelling and tasting. Trichloroanisole is a result of cork taint, and it can remind you a little bit of if you ever go to an old used bookstore. Old books, musty newspaper, or almost like a wet dog. And
yeah, I'll give you the wet dog thing. So I've had that happen to me with 2 other bottles. One very recently, and one about a year and a half ago. And the one about a year and a half ago was an expensive bottle. So I took it back to the producer. I was able to actually go back to the bottler, and I let him smell it, and he didn't need to taste it. He knew what it was right away, and it's exactly as you described it. And he replaced the bottle there and then on the spot. Even although I didn't buy it from him, I bought it through another party, another retailer. He just replaced it for me because he admitted that that's what it was. And yeah, there could be a little bit of that, but I've actually checked the cork on this, and it's utterly, solid and intact. There's nothing obvious there. There's no bad smells from the cork. And it doesn't. The smells are not the same as those other bad experiences I've had. That kind of gave me that really kind of heavy vegetal, maybe a bit like wet dog, as you mentioned. That was due to cork contamination. So sometimes, if you're having, it's a good point to make. If you're having a really bad experience with whiskey, and you just don't know why it tastes so odd, it's something to check out.
Yeah, so if the cork smells fine, then yeah, it's probably not the cork. And there's certain things I'm real sensitive to, certain things I'm not real sensitive to. I don't pick up, people talk about a funk for Springbank. I've never noticed it. People talk about sulfur notes on Macallan. I've never encountered it. But TCA, once I pull a cork, I don't even have to put my nose up to it. I'm super sensitive. I'll pick that up. So yeah, if you're not getting that on the cork, then yeah, it's something else. It's something else.
But
so
I think speaking to people who love Kilchoman, you know, they'll occasionally admit that the 4th edition 100% Isla is not their best showing. And we have to remember that whiskey in general, but especially a whiskey of Kilchoman scale, when they made this, they were probably only I don't know, 200,000 litres per annum, a fairly small scale distillery. You know, they don't have the depth of stocks to reach into. So when they're putting out their 4th edition Isla, you know, it's almost like you talked about whiskey being what it is as we know today. It kind of takes care of itself. The whiskey is going to be what it's going to be. And, you know, they put it out there and they go with it. And it's going to be different batch to batch, bottling to bottling. And certainly when it's a release such as this, and it's said that people know that the 4th edition is not to everyone's taste. But it's a very it's very subjective thing, as we know. And it's just, for me, this, you can see how much is left after. I've had this for 4 years, at least.
You didn't give up on it?
No. Well, I like to share it with people who say, what's the problem with this Kilchoman? And I'll let them try it. And they say, oh, okay. So
I just want to say,
I'm not going to throw it away. It's not like it's undrinkable. It's just not my favourite Isla whiskey. However, I've had other Kilchomans and lots of them since. When I went there last year, I came home with the other bottle that I have here, the 2009 vintage. And that's one that's lasting in my cabinet, but for a different reason, that I'm challenging myself to reach past it. It's delicious.
So I just want a really quick one to say hello to. There's another gentleman in the room underneath the bottle in the room. He says it says underneath the bottle, wine sommelier. So there's 2 of us sommeliers, wine sommeliers, who've drifted over into whiskey. His wife is Japanese. He's from Japan. He's done a number of really nice Japanese whiskey reviews. Anyway, just want to say hello and thanks for dropping in. So, you know, that's part of the journey as well. You know, not every wine you're going to have is going to be absolutely just mind-blowing, spectacular. Some are going to be just sort of everyday, you know, hey, I'm cooking something simple. I need a simple wine. I need something to put into my spaghetti sauce. Same thing with whiskeys. Not everything's going to be mind-blowing. And it's by contrast of maybe, and not that I want to spend money on this, but those lesser wines or lesser whiskeys gives me a great appreciation for the ones that are really, really, really good, that I really, really like. And I like to deal with whiskeys the same way I trying to deal with people. I don't, and this has been a learning experience of mine. Don't judge a bottle by a neck pour, and don't judge people by your first impression. A lot of whiskeys get better as you get past the shoulder, and a lot of people get better once you get past the sort of rough edge when you first meet them. And some whiskeys get worse as you get deeper into them, and some people get worse as you get to know them better. But that's part of life, you know. It's just part of the experience. But one of the things I think, at least philosophically, maybe this isn't my favorite Kilchoman. I like it. It's very, 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 very nice. But it's not one that rings my bell and makes me just go yippee yahoo. You know, it doesn't make me go wow. But one of the things I do like about it is, at least philosophically, what they're trying to do is produce something which is, as much as possible, be representative of the island. The casks are ex-Buffalo Trace bourbon, but the grain, water, everything else, the peat, everything's coming from in-house. And I appreciate that. And wine people, particularly the French, approach things from a sense of terroir, an expression of place, and how it represents a place where it's from. And I think this whiskey does have an expression of place. And at least to that extent, I paid, these are around $100 in the US, I think around 70 to 80 pounds, I think. But I appreciate this whiskey. It's a very nice whiskey. It's a well-balanced whiskey. It has nice development to it. It's not overly peaty. It's got some nice fruit notes, got some nice salty note to it. I get a little bit of pineapple, a little bit of pear, a little bit of apple with just a real nice introduction to smoke, almost like a slight marshmallow character to it. So I really, really like it. But I think more in terms of philosophical, in terms of what they're trying to do, I really, really like this.
Yeah, what I'm going to do, just to kind of throw it into contrast, is I'm going to pour what I know to love is this 2009 vintage. There's actually less ABV on this by a little bit. It's 46, whereas the 100% Isla, I think, it's 50%, a wee bit higher. But I'll just pour them side by side. And then it's kind of a reminder just how fantastic a whiskey Kilchoman can actually make.
So I want to read a few comments up there. Brandon Bullard asked me, what is your favorite Kilchoman? Be honest with you, I've only tasted 3. I could tell you my favorite Ardbegs, Laphroaigs, and Lagavulins. I like Kilchoman, but I'm not necessarily a big fanboy of them in terms of the whiskey themselves. I like them. I'm a bigger fan of Bunnahabhain, so I don't necessarily have a particular favorite, but I do really, really like this one. One of the things I other liked about when you're visiting, so there's a distillery in the south that has a restaurant, and the distillery in the north that has a restaurant. So if you're in the south, you can plan your trip to where you want to put Ardbeg in terms of visiting, maybe in between Laphroaig and Lagavulin, so that you visit a distillery and then go to another distillery, have lunch at Ardbeg. There's a cafe there, and I had haggis again there. Same thing in the north. If you visit Bruichladdich before going on to perhaps Cuila or Bunnahabhain, Kilchoman also has a real nice cafe there as well. So just a little tip on plan that is that you get 2 distilleries that have restaurants there. Did you eat at these cafes or restaurants when you were there?
Yes, I ate both of them, and it was the first time I'd eaten at Kilchoman, and I was really quite impressed. We had I had nice soup. I had a bowl of Cullen skink and some really thick, we call them doorstep sandwiches, you know, big thick sandwiches. So, and then down at Ardbeg we also ate, and it was in a really, really busy day down at Ardbeg, and we had haggis. I think you mentioned that you had haggis at Ardbeg as well. And despite it being a really, really crazy busy day, the food was pretty decent down at Ardbeg as well, I have to say.
So when you first got it, so you've told your story before, and I've told my story before, and probably most of our watchers have already heard them before. So you talked about how you not liking Scotch whiskey is almost like me as a Californian not liking wine. You know, how can you not like wine?
Right.
California is all about wine, you know? And so, but eventually you got into whiskey. Did you mainly get into peated whiskeys, or just started with sherries? Everybody has a different journey. So like Alan over at the Whiskey Friend, and we had a great time doing a premiere together. He's mostly still in the sherry, but he likes a good peated. Some people move into peated, some people don't. So what's been your sort of experience with peated whiskeys, in particular Isla?
Well, I remember not liking whiskey at all, and then it's a famous story about a colleague of mine asking to be taken to a distillery, so I had to research it, and I took him to a distillery, and all the lights came on. It was Glengoyne. So Glengoyne is probably famous for being the distillery that prides itself on having absolutely no smoke, no peat in their malting process whatsoever. And I kind of the journey went from there. And I did struggle with peated whiskies, with smoky whiskies. For a couple of years, actually. It didn't stop me having them at home because I liked sharing the whiskey with other people. And I knew that a lot of my friends enjoyed peated smoky whiskies, but I never really bonded with that style of whiskey, although I kept trying. And then my brother and I had a fishing trip in 2009, and we were out in a boat and enjoyed trying to catch fish and doing really terribly at it. And we picked up a 20 cl bottle, just a small bottle for traveling, of Lagavulin 16. It was pretty much all that we could afford, actually, because we were out with the kids and we had no money. And there was some money in our pockets, and there was some change in the bottle of the pushchair, the pram that we had at that time. And it was enough to buy this Lagavulin 16. And we had it, we shared it together. And I just simply, I don't know if it was the environment, I don't know if I was just ready for that moment, I don't know what it was, but the flavor that I got out of that bottle changed my life, because I didn't want to just engage with whiskey as a fun social distraction. as a casual thing, it made me want to discover why it was having this effect on me. It was seismic. And I'll remember my brother went to bed early that night and left me. I was clearing up the kitchen and things like that. And there was one dram left in a bottle and I had it on my own. And if I close my eyes and take a moment, I can still taste what I tasted in that glass in 2009. It was unbelievable. And the very next day we went through to the Edinburgh, we'd come back home, we went through to the Edinburgh Festival. And I went into Cadenheads and I said, anything that tastes like Lagavulin 16, please. And that's what started kind of me on peaty, smoky whiskies. And that was the moment I knew that for my 40th, I wanted to go to Isla to explore it more. And by the time that we traveled there, less than just 6 months later, I'd already probably bought something from every distillery on Isla. I just fell hook, line and sinker. And that's what you need, is just one of those epiphanies, right? One of those moments to happen. But it must have been harder for you to get into smoky whiskey as well, no?
Well, so the first time, I don't remember what it was. I started off with a very early negative impression of whiskeys. Don't remember was I was at a friend's house and the parents aren't home, getting into mischief. Hey, let's get into my dad's. It wasn't my dad, but my friend's dad. My dad didn't have any hard liquor or whiskey around the house, so I'm at a friend's house and hey, let's get into the whiskey. Let's try a whiskey. Pull a bottle, pull a cork, smell it, kind of taste it, and like, oh, that's nasty. Put that back. And for the next several decades, I never had any desire to touch it again. My impression of it was, before the rains would come, you get up on the roof and you clean out the rain gutters, the leaves and that had collected in there, so the water would flow through there and there would be this mucky, peaty almost smell to it, this kind of damp, mildewy leaves, rotten, smelled it, and you clean out the rain gutters for it. And that's what I equated whiskey. So when I was into wines and people say, oh, Eric, you're into whiskey, my first response was, oh, no, it's like rain gutter water. Why would I want to drink anything like that? So I did, coming into it, did sort of have a prejudged negative idea of it, but I had a life-changing experience when I went back to college and was studying winemaking, and I had a food and wine pairing class, and the instructor in the class was a winemaker and had been a sommelier. And he said at the beginning of the semester, he says, don't say, I don't like whatever, because you're presetting in your head, unless you've been fully experienced something. When you're first encountering something, don't say, I don't like this, because you're already prejudging in your head and you're going to have a negative reaction to it. Like little kids, they've never eaten a Brussels sprout, but then they've made it up in their mind that they don't like it before they've ever eaten it, So I had, for the first time, smoked salmon, which I did not care for, and a Pinot Noir to match together. And to this day, it's my favorite food and wine pairing. Whether it's grilled or smoked, I absolutely love it. And there's sort of an equation there. I think the smokiness, the ocean character, the seaness, that's not a word, the saltiness, the brininess, there's a parallel, I think, between, and yet some fruit. There's some parallel between smoked salmon with a Pinot Noir in terms of categories and a peated whiskey. So I think having learned to turn off that prejudging thing with a whiskey or wine set me up really well to, I think, approach this. I had to dip in slowly, I didn't dive in. I kind of, get a toe in, then your ankle, then your shins, So I started with something light, very, very light, probably Johnny Walker. There was a St. Andrews. It comes in a golf ball. Like
oh, yes. That's not our finest export.
No, but I didn't know. And then Bunnahabhain, which has just, a minuscule amount. And then eventually I got into everything else. Lafroig was a little more, took a little more work, but Ardbeg, loved Ardbeg the first time. I had it.
And it's Ardbeg is kind of your epiphany whiskey then to make you love the style so much, right? I know you're still an Ardbeg fan, and can I just take a moment while everybody's in? We've got 76 watching. I just want to mention what you did on a Sunday night. There was a fundraiser on Sunday night, and one of the stars of our community, Ardbaggy Andy Purslow, donated a fantastic 2003 bottle of Ardbeg Very Young, a very rare bottle of whiskey, quite expensive to find and buy. And he donated that for the fundraiser. And Eric, you bought it, and you paid a handsome sum for that bottle. And I know you're looking forward to picking it up when you come over. So congratulations, my friend, and thank you very much once again for that demonstration of your generosity. I'm sure everybody would join me in raising a glass and saying, well done, you star. Slant you.
Thanks, but I gotta let you in on something. I would have gone. I wasn't gonna announce this, but I would have gone higher. I set a limit to how. I mean, so we're bidding, and I got down for 800. So I mean, there's more of a story to that. If you guys haven't seen it, you can watch the replay. Last Sunday, Scotch Test Dummies did a fundraiser for a fellow police officer who's been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. I spent 20 years in federal law enforcement and had a lot of friends and colleagues in law enforcement, and I've lost family members to cancer. This past year, I lost one of my best friends to cancer. So I was very much motivated in supporting in this because when something negative happens and you can't fix it, the most you can do is positively as much as possible do something in reaction to it. And that sometimes the only thing you can do is then help someone else out in a similar circumstances as much as you can. And so that was my motivation in going into that. The fact I didn't even know they were doing an auction. The fact that they were auctioning things then just sweetened the deal. I was already planning on, helping them out because I've been given so much. I've been blessed so much that I just want to pass that on. So I don't feel I should get a cheers or do you? I mean, I was getting a
well. I think what you do and what you did there, your action, it just epitomizes. I'm always fascinated by the dynamics that kind of revolves around whiskey. When we hang out together as a whiskey group, as whiskey friends and things, we don't talk about the things that divide us. We don't talk about the stresses at home, at work. We don't talk about our politics, our religious beliefs. We don't talk about any of that nonsense. We just enjoy whiskey. And we enjoy talking about whiskey together, right? We spend all our time talking about whiskey. And I think often what that can do, finding that shared experience, that common ground, it can that focus on what's joining us kind of brings out the best in us. And I think the whiskey community has kind of embraced that, certainly what my experience of the whiskey community so far, and long may it last. So when you get people like Scott and Bart, who we all know and we've known for years, we love those guys. And if they're standing up and saying, there's a cause here, can you help us? It's our pleasure. It really, really is. And I think that Sunday night was a chaotic night, but a wonderful, wonderful testament to the generosity of whiskey people. Jimmy Jazz is in here tonight. Jim is in. And he also was involved in an auction for 2 of my coins. You'll remember I put up coin 40 from batch 1 and 2. And Jimmy bought those at $325. Now, probably Jimmy wanted the coins, but probably he's ambivalent, right?
Right.
He wanted to help, I think is the deal there. And I think it's just an awesome thing to witness. And yeah, long may our community remain focused on trying to be better versions of ourselves, right?
Right. And so I have this thing, for those who know, I typically call it the Whiskey Church on Sundays. I don't do this all the time, but I oftentimes use something about whiskey as an allegory, as a metaphor for something about life. And I did it earlier, even in this live stream, where I talk about judging a whiskey, not judging whiskey by its neck pour, not judging people by first impression. Some people, you meet someone on a very bad day, they're grumpy. In fact, something that happened today, and I feel bad about it. But you catch someone on their off day, you can catch a whiskey on its off day, to give it some time. So to share something what happened today. So tomorrow, Jason Whiskey Wise, so we're going to be recording a live stream tomorrow. We're doing a Boonhaven 12. And so I bought him a bottle so we can have a bottle, and I set the arrangement so he could go pick it up. And somebody didn't pass the word on. I said, this is who will be picking it up. And so it was up. They said, fine, he'll be able to come pick it up. No problem. I get a call at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm asleep. that they're not letting Jason have the bottle. And I'm like, what? Anyway, when you get woken up, you're like, or at least before I've had my first cup of coffee, I'm like, you know, I'm not pleasant to be around when I haven't had a cup of coffee and I get woken up and why are these numbskulls, you know, why can't I get the gate there? I told them, I explicitly told them, they said it in writing, this, you know, if that was the first time you ever met me or encountered me, you're like, wow, that Erik, he's a real grouch, you know. Later, I said Jason the text saying, hey, just let you know, I'm real grumpy before I have a cup of coffee, especially when I'm woken up. I sort of apologize, because I might have been a little bit grumpy with him, but anyway, it's all good. You got the bottle, issue settled. But I've learned by thinking about and contemplating whiskey and everything about it, the complexities of it, the labor, and particularly when you meet the people to it. There's better way to get rich than starting a distillery. They say it takes, in the wine business, they say it takes a large fortune to make a small fortune in the wine industry. People are making these wines and whiskeys and getting into this for the most part, particularly Kilchoman, because they have a passion for it, because they have a love for it, because
absolutely,
because there's a drive in it. Now, big conglomerates will buy distilleries for the money, you know, grant that, but for the most part, you're talking about artisans who have a real love for something and they have a dream of making something that they're proud to put their name on and hang their hat on. And that's another reason why I really support.
And it's a good point you make about Kilchoman there as well. It's not just about the fact that it was a big deal for somebody to invest heavily in a distillery and start up Kilchoman. I mean, nobody had built a new distillery on Isla for, I think, over a century, right? And what you have to look at is much more recent history. You know, after the whiskey fell out of fashion in the late 70s, and we had the whiskey lock, as we call it in Scotland, in the 1980s, where really we had lots and lots of maturing stock that came off the back of boom times, where it just wasn't being sold. And then so you've got distillery closure after closure after closure after closure. Right through all the famous closures of the early 80s from Diageo and lots of other producers as well, right up into Rosebank closing in 93. You've got Little Mill closing finally in 94. And then 1995, you've got Arran opens. And it's crazy. It's like, why? You know, what's happening? Is something in Arran? Born out of pure passion. And then in 2005, I mean, it'd been announced and talked about for a while before that, but the first spirit pours from Kilchoman in 2005. And I don't think much happened in terms of distillery openings, if anything, in between those in that decade. It was a quiet time. You know, single malt is becoming a bigger and bigger thing, but blends are still struggling generally. So you just consider that for a second, the passion that was needed from the guys behind Arran and then the Wills family behind Kilchoman in order to achieve that. And I know that a lot of people at the time, I wasn't that into whiskey at the time. 2005, coincidentally, was the year I got into whiskey. But I know a lot of people around that time were saying that it was all going to fail, that it was folly to open a distillery, because it was during a time that, for the most part, everybody was still focused on chasing yield and efficiency. But these distilleries were talking about making only malt. They weren't interested in being factories and selling to the traders market, to brokers. They were not interested in contract fillings. They were interested in making a nice malt. And look at where they are now. Arran is opening another distillery on Arran. Kilchoman has doubled its capacity. They've doubled up on their still house in the last year. They've got their own in-house maltings in now. It's just it's been proven. And look, every month seems like you hear about a new distillery, and I'm just speaking about Scotland. So it's kind of cool to recognise that, how brave a thing that was back in 2000, the early 2000s for Kilchoman, right?
You know, it's interesting because there's a parallel. I'm gonna drink some water real quick. There's a parallel in the trends in wine and whiskey. Italy, for example, California, even for a little while, had a lake or lock, as you said, a glut in the market. And when you look at what was the glut was in mass-produced plunk stuff, not artisan, not fine, not something that had a real sense of terroir, a place, an artisanry. And what changed?
Quantity over quality, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what changed things is and what improved things has been that shift to quality versus quantity. South Africa has done the same thing when they had, basically state-owned wineries. And of course, they had apartheid and all that, and things became just part of a big quantity glut, which couldn't be consumed all locally because of the embargoes and apartheid. But they had this transition period where they had to go from this lake of plunk into trying to make more artisan wines. And I think whiskeys is changing as well. And you talk about in a revival. And I've heard even documentaries, and I've heard other people talk about, is there going to be another glut? Is there going to be another glut? People live on fear base. And I've discussed this with Daniel Whittington a little bit down in Texas, is neither one of us think so, because if they ever go back to mass quantity, if they ever go back to plunk, if they go back to that, then yeah, I think I can see that happen again. But as long as they're focused on quality over quantity, because the people who are buying it are devotees. People are they're devoted to it, and if they have that philosophy of being proud of what that is they're making, and it's a reflection of their place and their philosophy and their spirit of where they're of being whiskey makers, then it'll continue to survive because people will continue to buy. Now prices will come and go a bit, but I think they'll continue to produce. So as long as they do that, I don't not, and then this I could be wrong. I just don't see another problem like that as long as they.
Well, I mean, I think that inevitably everything is cyclic, and I've often had these discussions, and I've kind of shared on my own channel as well that this idea that for years now we've been having people in the industry that have seen it before. They're saying this will end, this will come to an end, these boom times will end, and it's going to hurt us when it ends. But I think what's happening from my perspective is that the boom times that we enjoyed, that has happened through history in the late 19th century, when that disappeared, that was whiskey for drinking. That was a drink. That was just like a generic whiskey thing. And yeah, there were some better than others, but people were drinking as a drink. And that happened again post-war. There was another huge boom where really whiskey was drank from a tumbler over ice, or it was a base for mixing or putting soda in or something. It was a drink. It was for drinking. The boom that we're seeing now, in terms of Scotch whiskey, and I can only really speak for Scotch, it's the only area I feel comfortable in. The blends are kind of up and down, but we're speaking about single-digit percentages. It's kind of flat. Bulk whiskey, blended whiskey, and that's not to say bad whiskey, it's to say that the mass-produced product, I mean, that's made to a very, very high standard. But that's flat. Where we're seeing the boom is in the value, and the value is created by malt whiskey. So and premium blends, premium whiskey. So where people can taste and appreciate rather than just simply drink.
Right.
That's a different thing. We see it in wine, as you've just mentioned. We see it in craft beer. We see it in craft spirits, such as specialist gins and things. We see people stopping and thinking about what they're drinking now. And I think that's the difference. And I hope that means that the growth and the health and the whiskey scene that we're seeing just now can sustain.
So two other people I want to say hello to real quick. Jason from the Mash and Drum is in the house. How you doing, sir? He and I are going to be meeting up in April. We're both going to go down to Texas. Going to be touring Iron Root Distillery. That was another auction item, and they've allowed me to bring along a guest. So we'll be meeting up down there, and we've been,
I've already had the pleasure of meeting Robert and Jonathan, and those guys are awesome. You're going to have them.
And the last name is Licorice?
Yep, Robert and Jonathan.
It's not like candy licorice, it's spelled differently.
With a K, that's right. Licorice with an SH at the end. Sometimes those guys tune in. Sometimes you'll see, especially Robert, you'll see him tune in and say hello to everyone. Really impassioned whiskey people. Really nice guys. You're going to have a blast. You'll love it. And you're going there with Jason.
So I don't know how many days I'll be down there for. I fly in late one night, and then I'll spend 3 days there, and then fly back late on a Sunday. So I'll be there on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, visiting those around Austin, pub balcones, and then finish up with a 5-hour hangout around Iron Root. And then I'll probably do like a whole month. I'll bring back some goodies and take a lot of photos, and they'll probably do maybe a whole month of just focusing on Texas whiskeys. Oh, and then I want to say hello to Drew. Drew from Scotch for Dummies is in the house as well. And those guys are having a special dinner tonight at the restaurant that Sean works at. Wish I could be there. I was there at the last one, had a fantastic time. They're doing Deanston. They have a Deanston representative. So they're having a Deanston whiskey dinner. I don't think they're doing anything live like they did last time, but I wish I could be there. And Drew, say hello to everyone there, and I wish I could be there. Love Deanston. So get back.
Can I just say as well, just a heads up that since Drew's in the house, I never even spotted that he was in. I'm the only person that has seen Drew's blind challenge.
Oh,
he recorded the blind challenge and he sent me the footage, and I'm currently editing it into the next blind challenge video. So you'll see how Drew gets on very, very soon, and you'll also discover who he's nominated next, which is great fun.
Aqvavitae, in case you guys don't know, Aqvavitae's blind whiskey challenges are the most feared thing in the whiskey world, next to his quizzes that he has on his live streams. Very, very challenging.
Can I mention recently that I realized that I had to kind of pony up and take the blind challenge myself. I had to do that. And, I talk about the whiskey being on test and not the reviewer, and it very much is about the whiskey being on test. But the language that's used and the structure of it means that, of course, the reviewer puts themselves on test. And I felt very much that was the case when I was doing it. Yes, it's an inevitable dynamic. But after it and during it, I had great fun. I thought it was fantastic. And that's the feedback I get from the people who do. And even Drew, who's just done it, he came off and his first message back to me was, do you know what? That was great fun. And I think it's the integrity is utterly there. He has no clue what's in those samples. I've not even hinted at all. And he's just kind of got to go by his, and I think that's even if he gets it wrong, the fact he's been able to interrogate the whiskies and the whiskies been able to speak to him in some way, that's really, really cool. And then what happens is he sends the footage back to me and I edit it into a video that he then shares on his own channel. So you can understand the trust is really, there's a huge depth of trust there. But I can understand why people feel intimidated by it. But it's
Jason Coates just said, fear they sound like a blast. They are. Of course, I'm being a little tongue in cheek. But, you can't help sometimes your own ego gets involved and, gee, how am I going to come across on a video? I've taken a lot of exams, not only in terms of college and then to the university and from a master's degree and so forth, but a lot of whiskey exams, spirit exams, both written and then blind tasting, stuff like that. And you just can't help it, at least for me, because that's what my past is. When you come into this, you just really, 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 really want to do well. And then when you put yourself out there on video, at least when I take an exam, nobody sees my scores, just me and the examiner. But these are done live or pre-recorded when you get blind tasted on that. But I gotta say, when you miss a question on that last quiz thing, I kind of felt a little bit better because okay, good, now I don't feel so bad. Roy missed one too.
Which one was that?
The last one you had. You were given
on Sunday night.
Right.
Well, shout out to James Hope. James Hope's a friend and a supporter of the channel, and he had the idea last year to have me take my own quiz, and of course that made sense. And we set it up for the anniversary show on Sunday night. And James very much curated that quiz with me in mind. He pulled no punches, right? So what we experienced on Sunday night was one of the toughest, probably the toughest quiz that we've ever had. And he made a mistake. He highlighted the wrong answer in one of them. And I was absolutely certain I'd got it right. But I ended up with 5 out of 10. But because he'd made that mistake, I did actually get it right. And I got 6 out of 10.
Did that have the hammer mill?
Yes, it was a mash filter and the hammer mill. Yeah.
One of them was Tinic.
Tinic, yeah.
Tinic. And what was the other one?
Well, the two in Scotland that have that configuration is Insterney and Taninic. But just by mistake, and I know how easy it is to make that mistake because I do the quiz all the time, and even when you proofread, you still find you don't spot your own mistakes, right? And he'd highlighted Glen Elgin by mistake. I think it was Glen Elgin from memory. And I was certain that Glen Elgin didn't have a mash filter in Hammermill. I was certain that it was Taninic, and I was grabbing a book and things live on a quiz, thinking, no, I object. And he immediately emailed and said, Roy, really sorry, I made a mistake. Of course, it's Taninic. I'm sorry. And I know how easy it is to kind of make it. But I was relieved to get that message because it meant that I did score 6 out of 10, which to me is a pass mark, right?
You know, the funny thing is, I now know that because of that whole scenario. You learn. So you learn by making. I mean, it's better to learn by someone else's errors than by your own errors. Learn by someone's errors. But it tends to get more ingrained in your head. We talked earlier about senses bring back memories and ties to events to which we had that wine, we had that whiskey. It was at a bachelor party. It was at a wedding. It was at a bar. It was at a dinner party. It was when you met somebody. It was at an event. That ties these things in together. But the other thing is when you miss something and you go back and restudy it, it does help you learn it. As well, it gets ingrained into you a lot more as well. So it's another.
Well, right. Absolutely right, and it's the difficulty I always have because I want the quiz to be fun and light, but I want it to prompt thought, and I want it to make people think about why things are, and I want them to think about the dynamics of whiskey and the production of whiskey. I want them to think about the whiskey community and YouTube. I want them to I want to do all of that kind of thing. But I've got a question for you, and it's only just popped into my head. But I've got you here, so I can ask this question.
And I want to thank everyone for watching now. Thanks for tuning in, and good night. Cheers.
No, it's not a quiz question. Don't worry. I'm just really, really interested in your opinion.
Sure.
And you've touched on it a couple of times, and that's the reason it's popped into my head tonight, because I know as part of the Whiskey Sommelier course and things, there's a huge element of it is blind tasting. And you're expected to have a certain ability in order to progress through the ranks in wine, of course. Now, that very much exists in whiskey too, and in fact, the whiskey course I'm going through just now ends in 2 weeks' time, and a part of the exam I've got, it will be a blind tasting exam. But I do seem to get, the feedback I get, if we look at wine versus whiskey, seems to be that there's a certain process that you can go through when you're blind tasting wine that comes unstuck with whiskey. Because terroir is so ingrained in wine, right? But whiskey is much more about, modern whiskey production certainly is much more about logistics, and that they're not so focused on the immediate. And wine is fully reliant on the grape, whereas whiskey, barley is can often be overshadowed by the maturation vessel, by the environment. So I wanted to know your opinion. Do you think that people should be able to blind taste whiskey and assess whiskey in the same way that they're expected to assess wine?
To a certain degree, and it revolves around one word, and that is the word typicity, or what's typical. So you can make, and then classics. So there are classic regions for particular grapes, there are classic styles, classic means of production, but you could do something very, very, very odd with a grape and come up with something that is atypical. So, I created a 3-page exam for those who don't know for doing exams for whiskeys. I've passed it on to a few different people. I gave Roy a copy. I don't think you were as excited about it as Daniel was. I gave it to Daniel Whittington, sent a couple others because they have a school. They're running a school, so it makes more sense. Well, before I move on, so you're taking a course right now. Who are you taking the course with?
The course is it's an evening course. It's just once a week, so you only do 2.5 hours on a Monday evening, and it's in Glasgow. It runs over 8 weeks, but it's a gateway course, and it's very broad brush. It's very it's kind of for people in the trade, people in the industry, enthusiasts. And it's just a very broad brush thing, and it covers the history of whiskey, it covers production, it covers styles and types. But it's wonderful because he brings 6 bottles to every class, and we drink 6 drams throughout the course. So the trick is And to be fair to him, he doesn't share the whiskey until beyond the halfway point. So hopefully you've made the vast majority of your notes by then, and you can lock in your thoughts.
Okay.
But it's wonderful, and it finishes tomorrow. On Monday night we're going to take a tour of Glengoyne. So there's a kind of practical element there where you do a tour, and it's a closed doors tour. I've heard it's really good. And then the last week will be the week after that, where we do the exam.
Okay, so I actually want to go back. When I go back to Scotland in July, I'll be taking the 2-day diploma class with the EWA, the Edinburgh Whisky Academy. However, it's not a 2-day course because you have like 6 or 7 assignments or reading assignments you have to do before you get there. So if you come in not having done those, you're going to fail the exam. There's an exam on the second day. So I have some homework to do before I get there, and then I'll take this 2-day in-house class. But a lot of the homework will have been done before I got there. Anyway, so back to the original question. So it has to do with typicity, what is typical, so most common, and classics. So if I was blinding you on so let's just take Isla as an example. Isla, you think Isla, what's typical is peat, right? There are some non-peated whiskeys there, but generally speaking, most of it's going to be peated, and it's going to be peated that is different from, say, Orkney or Highland peat, or something coming out from Oban. So there's something that's typical of Isla peated whiskeys that's unlike everything else. So what would be fair in an exam would be a typical, probably more of a core range peated whiskey coming from Isla. And you do the same thing for the Highlands, Speyside, and then maybe even individual islands and things that are sort of classic examples. So, maybe some distillery in the north.
Is that kind of using the method of when you're addressing things to kind of narrow it down by working out what it's not? So it's not typical of?
Right. So, well, in terms of, well, first of all, what can be on an exam has to be classic and typical, which cuts out a lot of wines or cuts out a lot of whiskeys. It can't give you a Cabernet Sauvignon from Idaho, right? It has to be from a classic region, Napa, Bordeaux, Australia, Argentina, Chile. Don't think they give from South Africa, but potentially because it's the number one grape there. But so that's the idea. They're not going to give you a sparkling muscatel, from Idaho. Something just off the wall. Classic grapes, classic regions. And I would say the same thing would be with whiskeys. Is what's it? You might be thinking of stereotypical. A stereotypical whiskey from Speyside, a stereotypical whiskey from this region, and that's what would be on an exam. Then your approach to it is in doing your on your nose and your tasting, all the fruit, floral, spice, earth, other, could be tobacco or something like that. The basic profile character. What are these classic profiles? I mean, what are all these aromas and flavors you have? And then what are these typically representative in terms of a style of a producer and of a particular region? So you're narrowing it down. So this is a medium to heavily peated whiskey with a lot of smoke and ash. Yes, it has some fruit. This is not typical of the lowlands. This is not typical of, you can do sort of via negative, they say in Latin, the way of negation, and to what is not, and go, okay, based on these characteristics, it's from this region. Based on these characteristics, it's of this style, and it's probably within this ballpark. So if you give them totally blind, why is this not a bourbon? Why is this not a Canadian? Why is this not American straight whiskey? Why is this not a Japanese? Why is this not a whole lot of other things? So if I go global, I'm going to go, okay, old world or new world? Old world, you're looking at Scotland. You're looking at Italy, you're looking at Ireland. New world would be United States. You could put it in Japan, Canada, and so forth. Old world, okay, I narrowed it down to old world stylistically. Okay, I've narrowed this down to Scotland. I've narrowed this down to Isla. Now, okay, what producers are on Isla? Determine how far you want to go. Is this more like a northern Isla or more like a southern Isla? I'm going to go northern.
I would just like to ask everyone that's in the lounge. There's still over 60 of them in there hanging out just now. based on what Eric's saying, I think Erik, and I feel bad because I may be bullying you into this, I think Erik should throw his hat in for the Aqvavitae blind challenge. What do you think, folks?
I'll throw in my hat and my pants.
They put you on the nomination list.
So, sure. So I would go. So that if I'm getting to Isla, and I'm gonna go southern Isla. I'm gonna go northern Isla. I would probably go head towards northern Isla, and then I'm gonna go. Okay, what do we have? Choices. We have Bruichladdich. We have Kilchoman. I got Bunhaven and Coila. And so it is by that way. So if you want, there's a movie called Psalm, and it's about a group of guys. A lot of these guys I know, I've studied with, and there's a scene in which Ian Cobble, who later becomes a master sommelier, there's a scene where he's doing things, talk about maps and regions, and he's doing this thing in his hands, and they put in the graphics to where he narrows it down to a particular place with these maps, and by way of negation and to what things are typical of. And you kind of do the same thing with whiskeys. And that's why, for me, studying maps is so important. I spend a lot of time studying maps to geographically orient myself with a country and with a region and get to know the place. But that would be my basic approach to a whiskey. And given a blind taste test, now I've set myself up as, ooh, this guy's Mr. Expert, and I'll probably blow it out my arse.
Well, that's the thing is that, and I think that one thing that I will never ever do with the blind challenges is that I think it would be very easy to talk about, if we talk about what you've just shared with us there, it'd be very easy to manipulate that system in the opposite direction. And I would bring to you a Bruichladdich from Isla, for example, and ask you to find the Isla. I'd bring you an Ardmore from Speyside and ask you to find the Speyside, and of course it's going to be heavily peated. There are lots of examples that are the opposite of what you expect. But for me, the blind challenge thing, I mean, judging whiskey blind anyways is a fascinating thing to do. And I've always been obsessed with it, and the channel was founded on that concept. But I think what the blind challenge is set up to do, and the reason I think it's wonderful, is that it puts cheap whiskies against expensive ones, and old ones against young ones, and world whiskies against Scotch, and all of these different things. And what people seem to not focus on, and it's partly the way I've structured it, so it's kind of my fault, is that I should maybe do a summary at the end of these blind challenges to say, guess what, guys? The one that he favoured, his favourite whiskey, was a $30 whiskey, or you know, the 28-year-old in this example came close to the end, or sometimes it's the opposite, and it's the older one that gets the absolute favourite. So it's very much the whiskies that's on test, but for reasons like we've just been discussing, we see it as an opportunity to put our whiskey experience on test, and I think that's fun.
Absolutely. And you know, you can see a price tag and you prejudge into your head the quality of it, and then you end up making a quality assessment to it based on what you know about the price and the producer, which is another good thing about blind tasting, is it removes that element there regardless of cost. And it's really not, I love finding a wine or a whiskey that I go, that's only $15.
Yeah, you can, the wow stuff, right?
Yeah, put that on my list. That is awesome. And there are certain wines, not only in terms for myself, but people coming at people. I get asked about wines now, more whiskeys, but I still get asked wines. Hey, Erik, what's a really good wine to have with this food for under $20? I get asked that all the time, and I like to have in my pocket at least a handful of readily available, affordable, quality wines that I can put my reputation on it, saying, yeah, this is a good wine. But go to my earlier point about not being typical. So here is a whiskey. This is from San Diego. I picked this up. Met up with Bill, the Whiskey Dick, down in San Diego. We had a fantastic time. We did like a 2.5-hour live stream. We're not doing that tonight. And then I went and visited some distilleries down there. And one was San Diego Distillery. And this is a peated whiskey from San Diego. And I bought 2 bottles. One, I would like to blind someone just for laughs. But this is one that would be off. You could not put this on a legitimate exam because it's not typical. No one in a million years is going to go, it's got peated, it's got some fruit, it's got some spice. Must be from San Diego. You know, they're not going to come up with that, you know. But anyway, yeah, absolutely. And but it works the other way too. Unfortunately, you blind taste not something you never had before. You taste it, and you're kind of like, meh, it's not bad, it's not great, and you go $150. Are you out of your mind? And this is the one everybody like, particularly some bourbons that rhyme with schmappy.
Yeah.
It's a very nice bourbon, but not that nice. Not that nice. So blind tasting is a good, not only in terms of testing your abilities, analytical skills, but really to sort of give an even playing field for testing qualities and for building a resume. Build a resume of high quality price ratio whiskeys, because as much as I like to do a lot of obscure whiskeys and hard to find whiskeys and these unicorns, I need to do more as a service to my viewers to say, hey, look, here's some great whiskey great bourbons under 25. Here's some great scotches. I can't go under 25 for a scotch. Maybe some great scotches for under 50 that I could recommend, but build up a resume of those as well. So,
well, I think as well as you mentioned that is that I think that's one of the great things that happens in this community is that these videos go out, and whether it's you doing a review or a live stream, you know, the comments build under the video, right? And I often find that that's hidden gold that's under there. I know a lot of folk do read the comments underneath, but they share little nuggets of that. They say, I bought this whiskey, it cost me this, and it's fabulous, please try it. Or I recently bought this, I paid over the odds and it's not worth it. All of this is shared. You know, it's that kind of that way that we're working as a community to find out where the sweet spots of experience and value are. And it's not always associated with price. Price is really just a marker of supply, demand, branding, whatever it may be. There are lots of fantastic good value whiskies out there, right?
Which almost leads you into, I don't want to tell anyone about this one. It's such a great price, because if I tell anyone, then everyone else is going to buy it, and then the price is going to go up, or it won't be available in supply. But I can't approach. I always got to share good news of a great find of a whiskey or of a wine. One thing I want to ask you about, because it was on my mind when I was at Isla. So let's sort of change gears here. And we didn't talk about how long we wanted to go. We're approaching an hour and a half. I think getting ready to top off here. I know I don't want to keep you on for 2 hours.
Yeah, Eric, I really struggle. I can't do 2 hour live streams. I don't have the stamina.
We'll cut the short shortly, but I have one other question I wanted to ask you.
So I was being sarcastic.
Oh.
I struggle to keep mine under 2 hours.
Oh, sorry. It's funny because when I watch yours, I don't really pay much attention to the time. It just sort of rolls. And I'm usually doing other things while I'm watching. So anyway, here's a question. So when I was a kid, my uncle had a house in Clear Lake, Lake County, which is north of Napa. It's up in the hills north of Napa. So my recollections as a young kid going through the Napa Valley was cows, orchards, farms, very few wineries. When we thought of Napa as kids, we thought of tires and car parts. There's Napa Auto Parts. And then there was also an insane asylum up there as well, or a mental hospital. So when we'd say, hey, that guy's going Napa, we meant he was going, he was losing it. Now, of course, it's associated with wine. It's a world-renowned wine region since 1976. It's been on the map. It's now the number one tourist, and this is where I'm getting at, the number one tourist destination in California. More people are visiting the Napa than Disneyland. It used to be Disneyland.
Yeah.
So since I've been exploring Napa, or going to Napa since the year 2000, from the year 2000 to 2019, we're getting close to 20 years. What I've seen happen is, as a tourist destination, the costs of the wines have doubled, tripled, even quadrupled. The number of wineries is now around 400. The traffic and the tourism going there, particularly when the weather's nice on the weekends, is just insane. I don't go there anymore. One, I've been to 136 of them, so there's not much more to see that I haven't already seen that I want to see. But it's changed the place. I don't want to say spoiled. That would be bad, but you can't go do a tasting at the wineries there for less than $40 for a tasting. And that doesn't mean you get to bring anything home. When I first went there, tastings, if they charge, a lot of them were still free, $5, $10, and you took home a souvenir glass. So in 20 years, it has radically changed. The from my perspective, price quality ratio is inflated. And I don't want to say spoiled because, and I have a lot of friends that work up there. It just isn't what it used to be. And a lot of people kind of go, what a bummer, you know? One of the concerns I had when I went to Isla was this place is awesome. This place is fantastic. It's more difficult to get to than Napa. That's an advantage. If you're gonna go to Isla, you're gonna have to work to get there, either a 2-hour boat ride or a half-hour flight on a plane to get there. You know, Yep. So there's that, which is kind of a good thing. You got to, if you're gonna go there, you're gonna have to be dedicated to get there. But the one thing that was on my mind was, I hope this place doesn't get spoiled by tourism. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that there's a lot of, you know what, nostalgia is everything is a double-edged sword, right? Nostalgia is wonderful, but it's also dangerous. You know, pessimism is wonderful and dangerous. Optimism is wonderful and dangerous. I would have to say that my feelings are that we, outside of Facial, Isla has the capacity to entertain more visitors out of season, right? And I think it would be nice for them to find an elevated baseline. And I say that not as an expert on Isla or tourism on Isla or anything. I think the rest of the country, the distillery visitor, the footfall information year after year is more and more, but that makes sense because there are more visitor centres. In Glasgow, there's a brand new distillery just opened recently in Glasgow. And I don't think that's going to detract too much from other distilleries that are on coach routes and things like that around the country. There are visitor centres opening in Edinburgh. Diageo is putting a new Johnny Walker experience in Edinburgh. I think everything is a double-edged sword. We can't have all this variation. We can't have all this wonderful bandwidth in whiskey and investment in it without having the inevitable negativity that comes with popularity. It's just the way of it. And if you ask me, you know, what I would prefer, I always kind of think to myself, what's the alternative? And the alternative, if the alternative is back in the 80s when everybody hated whiskey, it's not that everybody hated it, it was just very unpopular. Right. We just don't want to go back there because yes, you could buy the whiskies cheaply, but the reason for that very few people were buying it cheaply. Very few people were buying it and enjoying it. Very few people were sharing about it. And the reason that we're having such fun with whiskey right now, yes, it's getting more and more expensive, but the reason it's getting more expensive is that our community is building. The people that are enjoying whiskey is building, and it's getting better. And I think whiskey deserves that. Right. And you can't age something for 12, 15, 18, 21 years and expect to pick it up cheaply. That's selfish. That's a selfish attitude. And if you want to have something that you can share with everyone, there are downsides. But on balance, I would rather have it that way.
The Alchemist, you know, I mentioned the challenges of getting there, which is you got to be patient for the ferry or take the plane in there. But he also pointed out the weather. One of the things about the Napa Valley is even on colder, rainy days, February and March is beautiful. It's a mustard season. These mustard flowers, you know, it's even during the middle of winter, it can be beautiful. That's actually probably a strength. Alchemist points out is it's so wet there and rainy there. That's also going to counterbalance the any sort of mass tourism. I guess the one thing I don't want to see a freaking Starbucks, a Walmart, McDonald's, or that I don't want to see these American chains go in there. At least restaurants and everything else there. I want people to live well, to prosper there, and be able to raise families there and so forth. But I just don't want it to become Americanized. I guess that's probably my biggest concern there. But anyway, I don't think there's any.
Yeah, I think we're a long way off from that happening. Although nobody would put it past, you know, Starbucks. But I think yeah, that it is. And I mean, the weather as well. There's almost a disappointment when you don't get a horizontal rain day on Isla and you don't get a really, really windy day. And you take people to Isla and they wonder what you're talking about with the crazy weather. The Alchemist Sevi is absolutely right. It does rain a lot there. But the people of Isla have a special coating. Did you know that? To prevent against the rain. The people of Isla.
I was reading a comment by Whiskey Throttle. It says Burger King and KFC are the big popular stuff in Glasgow, at least. Anyway, sorry, so I missed the end part of what you were saying. Sorry, can you repeat that?
I'm talking about the special coating that the people of Isla have to protect against the rain. Skin. I mean, the rain is not. They always say, you know, it's not about the weather, it's the clothing, right? And it's very rare that the weather can be so bad. It's really, really extreme. Winds probably would be the worst thing. But the weather, it's difficult for it to be so bad that you can't get out and visit a distillery or go somewhere, find a hostelry, and, you know, chat to people who are travelers or locals or whatever it may be. So yeah, I wouldn't ever discourage anybody from going to Isla because of the weather. I would just ask them to be patient with the ferry crossings, right?
Right. So I've actually seen some photos there, particularly around Christmas time. You see more of them post on Christmas time. Really beautiful photos of the place covered in snow, you know. And there's a gentleman on Twitter. He's been posting. He does like an everyday video of current weather on Isla. He's videoing himself. It pops up in my stream. I don't remember who it is. But I would almost like to go there for that experience, just that it would be a different experience on Isla to visit it there in the snow. But being a Californian, I just have to sort of double down on the clothing and to be ready for it. So anyhow, I kind of want to wrap this up a little bit. We've been at this for about an hour and a half. Don't need to go a total 2 hours. But I really want to thank you for coming on. I want to thank everyone.
Do you see what I have here, Eric?
Oh, yeah, there you go.
No, specifically, do you see that little number?
Number 44. Hold on. Yeah, that looks like this one. It's a number, different coin. Oh, yeah.
So we need to, this is the younger brother. We need to get these guys met up soon. You sent me your address today, so it's winging its way across to you. I'll try and get it in the mail tomorrow. So
in case you guys don't know, I mean, I have these coins as well. Mine are made from genuine artificial gold, and they're guaranteed to stop a bullet.
This isn't real. Are you telling me that's not real?
Yeah, no, it is real. It's just genuine artificial gold. And this is the one I have here is one without a number. I had 100 of these made. I probably got maybe 40 of these are left. And then they have my face on there, which that is my icon. And Roy actually designed this for me. He doesn't want me to say that because he wants you to think of me when you see this, not him. But I have to give him the credit. And on the one side I have, it says Vino Veritas, which is in wine there's truth. On the back side, the Whiskey Ambassador logo, and it says Cupum Veritas, which is in Whiskey We Trust. Anyway, so a lot of this, we make these coins, and some guys use it for fundraisers. I did it just for fun. I did something a little different, so I want something a little heavy duty, something that is very sort of loud and eye-catching, kind of like me, very shiny, kind of like my bald head. But they've become popular, and I probably this next year I might have another series of these come out that'll be similar, but they'll be silver. Anyway, so Roy has new coins out as well. So anyhow, if you guys haven't already liked or subscribed, please do so. And I'm sure everybody here has already subscribed to Roy at Aqvavitae, but just in case you haven't, please do so. Hoyt, I didn't say hello to Hoyt. We met at the Scotch 5th anniversary. Hoyt Handful, I want to say hello real quick before we go out. But anyway, so what I've got currently planned, so currently doing Isla month. I'm actually sad that this month is ending because I could probably do Isla a year and just do more, just do more whiskeys. I really, really love these, but I'll be moving on to bourbon next month. And then April will be miscellaneous, and I'll be doing some traveling to go down to Texas to do some reconnaissance down there, visit distilleries, get a sense of what's Texas doing, what's it got into how are Texas whiskeys reflective of its sense of place, and meet the people down there. And they talk funny down there in Texas. I don't know if you know that or not. To me, they sound a lot like you. So looking forward to that. We're meeting up with Mash and Drum. I don't know if we record video together. I don't know. We'll figure it out when we get down there. July, going back to Scotland and be a couple of days in London. Tomorrow will be a premiere of Vin from No Nonsense Whiskey. I'll be posting that tomorrow. That'll go live. Hopefully both of us will be able to chime in and interact with everyone who's watching. tomorrow I'll also be recording a video with Jason Whisky No Wise, and I will be doing a Bunnahabhain 12. And I haven't 100% sure where I'm going to, because we're running out of time this month, but what I'm going to do as a premiere, probably maybe the last day of the month. We'll see. So those are my current plans. And there'll be more to come. It's a constant journey, and it's not about. I'm going to steal a line here from My Bourbon Journey. It's not about the journey It's not about the jet destination. It's about the journey and enjoying the exploration of whiskeys. And for every answer that I find in my studies, I come up with 10 more questions. There's always something new to explore. It's just one of the wonders things. It's just learning, and then enjoying the process, meeting the people, going to the place, and then learning more about the production. And try as much as possible to meet the people who produce these great spirits. So, Roy, you got anything you got going on? Anything particular plans that people should know about?
Yeah, I would say on the editing table right now, I've got a video project still going on called "I Don't Like Whiskey."
That's like heresy to me.
Yeah,
Blasphemy.
That's the title of the video. I don't like whiskey, and I guess when the video goes live, you'll understand what that's all about. On the 28th is the next VPub. It's the last day of the month. I think you and I will both have a stream on that same day. Then did I hear you say that you're going to go live at the last day of the month? But yeah, the last VPub is Thursday evening. Other than that, no, I move at a slower pace at Aqvavitae. I think people have come to terms with that.
Alrighty, so hey, I want to thank you again. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope everyone has an absolutely fantastic weekend. And as I don't have my own, I don't think I have a motto yet. I need a motto, a slogan to come up with. But although we're doing this across the internet, he says it's not really whiskey until it's shared. Roy, thank you very much for sharing this time and a dram with me. Cheers.
It's a pleasure, Eric. You're a superstar, a generous gentleman as well. Thank you very much. Cheers, my friend. Sláinte.
Sláinte.
Thanks to everyone for joining in.